Good afternoon, everyone. Today I'm going to be giving you a special presentation on the essays in A Markets for Liberty by Linda and Morris Tannehill. And this essay specifically can be found in this book, The Anarchist Handbook, which is organized by Michael Malice and is a great book, fundamental for many and most questions considering the ideas of anarchy. And the article I'm observing is called The Competitive Market for Policing. So many people ask the question, you can't have anarchy. Why? Because you wouldn't have authority, you wouldn't have security. How would justice operate in a free society? And I think what's interesting to mention is that the Tannehills don't actually use the word anarchy. They refer to a free society without a coercive nation state. And where they begin is giving you a contrast to the present day situation of a government and their use of force and punishment. And they refer to this as the traditional fallacy, which is that there's a society and it is possible to commit crimes against the society. But from a praxeological perspective, we know that it is individuals that compose a society. Therefore, in our perspective, crimes cannot be committed against a society, they can only be committed against individuals. And there can be groups of individuals that have a crime committed to them, but it is still the individual that has been the victim to a crime, and therefore, the debt or the punishment that is given to a criminal should be in reparations to the victims, not to a society. Because if you concede the point that yes, crimes can be committed against a society, you're leaving open the availability for a government to be the punishers of the crimes committed against a society. And this is the traditional fallacy, is that there exist crimes against society and we need a state to punish those specific crimes. And if we look at the present day penology, which is maybe the study of punishment theory, we see that the principle in operation is what the Tannehills refer to as the vengeance principle. This is getting revenge on the criminal because he has done something wrong. And it is not the victim who should be compensated for what has been wrong to him, but it is the criminal who should be punished instead. And if we look even closer with prisons today, at least I can speak in the United States, that if someone is a victim of a crime, say their arm gets chopped off, not only does the criminal go to jail, it is the victim who has to compensate the criminal's ability to survive in a jail via taxation. And it costs, I think, around $65,000 a year to keep one prisoner in a jail cell. So it is not even the criminal who is really punished in a naturally just manner. It is just revenge to throw him in a cage and lock him up. And when we discuss a free society, it is important to begin with property rights, because with property rights, well, all rights are property rights. Your life is your property, and everything you own is an extension of yourself, essentially. So, for example, if someone steals my car, does that make my car in the criminal's possession? Yes. But does that make the car legitimate ownership to the criminal, the person in use? No. The legitimate ownership is still my own. I own that car. It doesn't matter the duration of time. If I can prove that I have the title to the ownership of the car, then it is indeed still mine. And these ideas of property rights are important to understand because it's only, again, as we said, that crimes can be committed against individuals, not a society. Society doesn't have private ownership. If anything, there's communal, public property, but with disregard to any one person owning this, the crimes are much more abstract, and it is only in the private property rights of individual in their beings, in their persons and possessions, that we can more accurately adjust the severity of crimes. So, in a free society, instead of this court process, we have something beautiful in substitution. And that is arbitration. So, in a free society, when you don't have a state, the natural governance would be constructed in the complexity of insurance companies. Insurance companies are the natural framework for a free society's order and governance because what they have is assets. And their assets are the people who purchase these insurance policies. And those are the members of the society. So the insurance companies, acting in their own self-interest of maximizing their profits, will try to maximize the security of their persons by limiting the payouts, the cost that they have to pay upon a insurance claim. For example, someone's house burns down, the insurance company has to pay them out in compensation for the claim. So what they might do is say, okay, if you're going to buy this home, you need make sure a fire protection, whether it's alarm or a fire team in the local area or equipment to mitigate this exposure to this danger. And so in the same manner, when it comes to violence and crime in a society, you would want, as an insurance firm, to have some method of security, whether that be agencies under the same insurance company or third-party agents that provide the security in a society. Think of it like you're the owner of a restaurant or a discoteca. You would hire bouncers. Either the bouncers work for the club or you hire another agency to provide you bouncers. Either way, the security is important, and how you get it is up to other technicalities. And essentially, under this method of arbitration, it's replacing the court system because there is no courts. That's a status model. So what you have for arbitration is dealing with crimes, but again, instead of the vengeance principle, crimes are more accustomed to incurring a debt upon someone. So, for example, I punched Vicente in the face, I did him some damage. This would have to be compensated not by me going to jail, but it would be costly to me financially if his insurance company said, hey, this cost him a day and a half of recovery, he lost his work, his ability to work for that day. We're going to arbitrate a claim against you. And this is a beautiful process where when you commit a crime, this is a monetary debt, and what you need now is a system of compensation. So, this is going to get very theoretical, so stick with me here. Basically, the insurance companies that sell insurance policies of security to people, if a criminal commits a crime, this is essentially incurring a debt to the victim. And the insurance company is going to look for compensation along with the victim. So this compensation format can take place in many ways. And this is the main idea of punishment in a free society is not imprisonment, it's compensation. And so what this looks like is either my insurance company is going to present the criminal with a bill. This is saying, this is your damage, your crime you committed, this is the cost. Now, either the criminal can say, yep, I did that and I will pay this. Or they can claim that they're either innocent or that the compensated demanded of them is excessive. Either way, the accused and the accuser are both likely to go into the system of arbitration. Now, what is arbitration? It's the service in a free society establishing the price of crime, of punishment. So it looks like multiple companies competing on what is the just price for a crime committed. And so you have the criminal and the victim and his insurance team. Both of them will go to arbitrating a dispute. And why is that? Well, this is because in a free society, it's not only financial costs that are imposed upon someone for committing a crime. And this is very interesting. I think in anarchy, there would be a king. Now, what do I mean by this? The king is not a person. The king is the concept of reputation, both for the individual and the firm. If my insurance company overly accuses the criminal of paying too much, this criminal is likely to spread the word that this insurance company is unfair. Or if the arbitration agency deems an unfair punishment to the criminal, then people will soon figure out that this arbitration agency is not the most reputable. Same thing, if the arbitration agency gives a punishment to the criminal that is way too low, then the victim and the insurance company will say this arbitration agency is non-reputable. And this is the idea of what I call the spectrum of justice. So on both sides, we have injustices. And this is punishment that is too low. And we have injustice on the other side. That's punishment that is too excessive. And so the idea of the arbitration agency arbitration, they use a tool, and this tool is called mediation. They're mediators. They're mediating a punishment. They're looking at both sides of the spectrum and saying, this claim right here is exactly what we're going to impose. Why is this? Because in a free society, you don't have the static laws. Each crime that's committed is highly individual. It's highly unique and it's highly complex. Therefore, we cannot say just because you were selling drugs, you're going to get 10 years in a prison cell. These laws don't work in the same manner. It's what was the crime committed, under what conditions, how excessive was it, because there's cost. And going back to the idea of cost, when you pay as a criminal for reparations, you have your basic expense factors. And these basic expense factors are not just replaceable items of stealing a car, stealing a watch. They're also non-replaceable items. And these are called income measurable items. And what these would be is like, stealing the life of someone, for example. How can this be measured in monetary means? Well, we can't. The idea of justice is to have established reparations to the degree as precise as humanly possible, and it's most often going to be in monetary terms. Because the idea is, if this person was not going to sell this item that was stolen or destroyed from them, at least they should be in a position where they're not worse off. And what that means is that at least they will have monetary compensation for this destroyed item rather than just having it disappear altogether. But under the current system, if someone steals your car and crashes it, you're not compensated. The government doesn't compensate you. But in this system, your insurance company, who you had insurance protection from, is liable to compensation. So they use their method of subrogation to seek out the criminals, doing detective work, and then they find the criminal, and this is how they punish them. Not only are there costs in the basic expense factors, but there's also mental and physical suffering that can occur on the victim, and these are very difficult to establish costs on, but they're necessary. Crimes are not always physical damage, they can be mental. And then you have secondary reparations. If this criminal kills a victim, his family has been harmed, essentially. This is a secondary factor of expense that the criminal is liable to pay, right? So like say the dad of a family was murdered, it's up to the criminal to pay the debt incurred to the family. and maybe they establish through the arbitration 100 million euros. I'm not sure, monetary payments specifically, but I think this is the general idea of how crimes would be reprimanded in a free society. Now we raise the question of what happens when a criminal is poor, or he can't immediately pay off the debt. Well, this is when we get into the idea of, instead of prisons, having these things called debtor workhouses. Going to erase this. That's not an eraser. Anyway, debtor workhouses. Okay, this is where punishment in anarchy is really theoretical. Not only would the punishment be better, it would be more severe. And this is something uncomfortable for a lot of people considering a free society, because it would not just be sitting in a jail. You would be, in a way, forced to work. And these debtor workhouses would vary in intensity of security and punishment. So what this looks like is, hey, you have to work here Monday through Friday. There's no fences. You can even shop on the weekends. You can see your family on the weekends. But if you run away, you will be sent to a more security-intensive workhouse. And so this allows for various degrees of how to operate with criminals in a society. And it's based on character, more or less. If you commit a crime, you incur this debt, it's disadvantageous to you in the long run because you have to pay this off. So what I call this is the excellence mechanism, or the excellence incentives in a free society. And it's your self-interest that leads itself to justice. If we observe England under, I believe, Queen Elizabeth I, we will see that the punishments for crimes were very severe. For the most not severe crimes. And what this looked like was beheadings, hangings, this type of intense, severe punishment. But what that left the population with a feeling of was a sense of injustice. Injustice that the punishment for crimes was too high. And not only did that not prevent more crimes, crimes continued because they felt like society has done them wrong and were in no position to act any more just or moral than we're currently acting. So really the question for justice is how to have a just society is not what type of punishment to have. The only way to have a just society is if you correct the method of justice to begin with. And this excellence mechanism, when you have the self-interest not only of the criminal, saying this is going to be costly, not only of the victim to avoid incurring any debts, it's possible for the insurance company to commit a crime against the criminal, and now the insurance company is liable to pay reparations to any harm that they excessively put on the criminal. You also have the self-interest of the arbitration agencies who say the only way we exist is if we provide a competitive service for establishing the price of crime and punishment. So if we favor one side or the other, this in the long run is going to do us harm. So we need to act in our self-interest of arbitrating and mediating the best possible ability that we have, the best possible mediating justice that we can do. So this is how you get to a just society and a free society. Okay. So we've kind of scamped it around. But getting to the last part of this presentation is some objections. The objections under a free society that wouldn't warring agencies and governments rise up again through brute force and take power. Well, let's consider that. What does that look like? First, if we have security and defense agencies, what this implies is that at some point in time, it is in the interest and incentive for these defense agencies to initiate coercive methods on a population. And this change in the structure of how a defense service in a free society operates has some consequences. And some of these consequences are immediately excessive retaliatory force, not only by other defense services, but on the customers as well. If you're someone associated with this coercive defense agency, you're going to be scrutinized. And now we get into back to the idea of reputation, where it's harmful to your reputation to be associated with any coercive insurance company. And what this means is severe business ostracism. People will avoid you quicker and more effective than they avoid COVID-19 because they cannot stand being associated with a coercive agency. And even if you say, well, this coercive agency can exist and they don't care about their reputation. Well, now you're talking about a supervillain. That's exactly what a supervillain does. A supervillain exists in a society where everyone knows this is a bad guy, this is a bad agency, and he exists through, the means of illegal services and goods. And so this is a combination of what the mafia does. But in a free society where you don't have black markets, it's possible to have, these services pop up where they are mafia style. But you have to consider, in a society where there's no black markets, and black markets are where mafias thrive, how does that look for the mafia? Well, maybe they don't disappear, but you have to concede the point that in the absence of black markets where mafias thrive, the mafias would at least be smaller than they were previously under a coercive government society that allowed for mafias to survive. We can look at Prohibition in the 1920s. Every single bottle of alcohol that was distributed in the United States during Prohibition era passed through the hands of members of the mafia. So it's really the government that exists that allows for the existence of the mafia. It's kind of like, not the parasite, but, the fish that leeches on to the bigger fish to clean the fish. Like it's the mafia and the government right there. It's the sidekick to the state, if you will. And again, coming back, the insurance companies, for them, aggression is a liability. This means they have to make more claims and payouts. So, to wrap up, I will tell you the 4 major necessities and requirements for a coercive insurance company to exist and become the new nation state. First, the defense company would have to get control of an army. Because how else would you rule a society if you don't have the means to enforce it? And you have to remember that members of this army do not have employee immunity. And there's also no conscription. So it would be very difficult to motivate the men to enact this type of brigade. Second, this defense service would have to have a near monopoly on the society's provision of defense security. And in a competitive market where you have alternative options that you can choose from, it's unlikely that a competitive defense service operating from the profit motive of providing the best service at the best price would reach that point of near monopolization enough to begin their coercive army. Thirdly, customers cannot be taxed. Customers have to be willing to pay for this defense service to go rogue. There's no taxation. Taxation fosters the methods of the state of conscription being coercive, being destructive, all these types of things that we don't like. And fourthly, you have to keep this secret, because if you're trying to become the next reigning authoritarian, tyrannical regime, it's going to be very difficult if people start to catch on and independent media figures trying to out you for what your plan is over their society. And people, again, will be quick to avoid and associate themselves with anyone who's extremely violent in this way. So, to conclude, the objection that a tyrant might take over is actually a devastating argument against government. Thank you very much.
Okay. Excellent presentation.
Thank you.
You have followed a real good structure, and you have used good and clear expression, and you had key points in the main ideas. Excellent development of a complex subject, and excellent communication skills.
Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed for your presentation. Okay, you are the guide, you have the floor, you must follow, you must control the
Yes.
debate.
Well, I want to begin with clearing up any questions or doubts that you have either regarding the idea that a rogue coercive defense service would spring up in an anarcho-society, or if you're more interested in the punishment theory in a free society and the methods of arbitration and mediation and the debtors' workhouses. I kind of was like flying over the place a little bit, but if there's anything that left you confused, I would like to try and take on your questions and give you a satisfying question. Yes.
Sí. ¿Te importa que hable en español?
Sí.
¿Te enteras bien?
Sí.
Vale, genial. Ha hablado de teoría del castigo, punishment theory,
Ajá.
y es una de las cosas que dentro de la teoría libertaria está todavía por desarrollar. It's something that we need to develop more.
Sí.
Entonces, has comentado que la mayoría de castigos serían monetarios, con dinero, en el arbitraje.
Sí.
Pero en sí mismo, para poder llegar a eso, previamente tenemos que desarrollar una teoría del castigo libertaria.
Sí.
Y la teoría del castigo libertaria no habla de dinero, digamos, sino habla de, por ejemplo, proporcionalidad. Tú me pegas en la cara
Sí.
y en teoría yo, como víctima,
Sí.
tendría derecho a devolvértelo y darte otro.
Sí.
Porque te tengo que devolver lo que tú a mí me has quitado, y después porque yo te hago lo mismo que tú me has hecho a mí.
Ujú.
Seguir siguiendo un principio de proporcionalidad. Claro, una vez que hemos sentado esa teoría, luego ese sería el límite a donde podemos llegar.
Sí.
Es decir, en la víctima, y es una cosa que es verdad en la teoría libertaria del punishment, el castigo, o sea, la cuestión no es tanto el castigo, sino la retribución a la víctima. El eje central en la teoría libertaria es la víctima, no el criminal. Y la víctima decide sobre el criminal. Entonces, en este caso, esa teoría del punishment limita hasta dónde puede llegar la víctima para exigirle la deuda al criminal. Luego, eso ya es la teoría abstracta, pero de manera aplicada sí se daría, creo yo, mediante arbitraje y en términos monetarios, porque sería mucho menos costoso, y además sabemos que el dinero es un bien fungible. O sea, pero creo que lo interesante de esto es ir al fundamento teórico último, porque ahí es donde se establecen los límites. Y aunque habitualmente en el sistema libertario pueda darse mediante dinero, igual hay gente que prefiere, oye, no, pues yo no quiero dinero, sino que yo quiero que me compense de la misma manera en la que me ha atacado, por ejemplo, ¿no? Entonces, luego, lo de la reputación es muy bueno. Igual sería interesante que lo conectaras con alguna teoría económica sobre el social capital.
Sí, sí, esta.
Exactamente. Sí.
Oh, perdón, sí. Continúa.
Vale. Y después, lo que has comentado de mediation y arbitration, la semana pasada estuviste en el seminario de Miguel Ángel Alonso sobre arbitration.
No.
Vale. Pues ahí fue muy interesante porque habló de arbitration y la diferencia entre arbitration y mediation. It's not the same. Arbitration and mediation. Arbitration is more like there is a judge and this
Sí.
committee has to decide.
The arbiters.
It's the arbiters, yeah. But the mediation, it's just a third person that tries one side and the other side to, let's say, coincide in some points. But there is no, let's say, no sé bien en español cómo se llama eso ahora. Fallo, como...
fairly.
Sí, pero como fallo de juzgado.
Como resolución.
Resolución.
Yes, very-
Resolution, like
I
a
know.
court
When they,
case, a
when
resolution.
they just made a dictation,
Yeah,
the decision of a yes.
it's-
Yeah.
or a court, or a arbiter.
You're saying that doesn't exist?
In mediation, no.
Okay. But in
But
arbitration?
in arbitration, yes, that's one of the differences.
I see.
So I think it's very interesting that you keep in mind those differences
Yes.
to try to be as most precise as possible.
Okay. Thank you.
And then that will be all.
You got me thinking as well that, okay, yo quiero traer en español. En un sociedad de libertad, la concepto de punishment es no un concepción precisamente legal y no moral. Solo es un coste de monetario de un crime. Entonces, la moralidad posible es separado en la sociedad, porque yo ser muerte, una cosa, es un coste, ok, necesito pagar por eso, es todo, y para mí este concepto es muy interesante, porque es no específicamente de injustice, es cuánto cuesta
Yeah,
de eso.
I see your point. You are seeing it more economically,
Yes.
but the foundation is ethical. Is the idea of justice. So you have These are economical questions behind, or then in reality you may have more economical questions related to monetary payments, and that the majority of punishment is let's say done through monetary payments. But the foundation of that, what it comes from, is a matter of justice. It's an ethical discussion. So I think you have first to. This all comes from the non-aggression principle.
I want
Right.
to disagree. De acuerdo, pero
Okay.
para eso desacuerdo porque tomar un alcohol o tomar una droga para mí es no una cuestión moral, es una cuestión de valor subjetivo, y si tú tomas una cosa que en esa sociedad es ilegal, es no moral,
Sí.
es un coste.
See, but if an arbiter has to determine whether an action is a crime or not, the person has to inevitably resort to a theory of justice.
No,
Right.
no.
No? What?
Este árbitro que determine un coste esta es la compañía de determinar los costes de punishment y justice. Es un servicio con un
Yeah, but
precio.
arbitrators do not only calculate or estimate monetary cost. They also dictate what is just, and what is not just. They are like judges, let's say, but it's private judges.
Sí, pero justice es invisible. Es
Yeah, I see your point.
Yeah,
I mean that there is an ethical question behind that economical operation, let's say.
perhaps. But I want to be with Mises. Like there are no moral judgments, I think. Something like that.
Okay.
Yeah. But I agree as well. I think you're right. I just like this possibility that maybe there's an alternative to the concept of morality.
Okay.
Can we speak about immoral or ethical markets
Yes.
from the point of view of demands? And we can establish a price. How we can put the price to a moral action?
Well, they say that you cannot ask the impossible is impossible to ask.
No.
But beginning there, the establishment of a price on a punishment, I think definitely needs to be naturally developed. I guess to use the spontaneous order of this, but in a society where, for example, someone is killed, Robert Nozick said the best way to recompensate the victim would be to put the criminal in a chamber and the victim in a chamber and flip a switch and transfer the life of the criminal to the victim. And that would be the most perfect form of justice. But you have to use monetary prices to deem what the cost is incurred. So you have the value destruction of that item. Say I destroy this water bottle and it's €2. Okay, that's one price. But my suffering, my mental suffering of losing the water bottle for a temporary moment, maybe that's another €1. And then that was for my family, and so that's a secondary cost that my family doesn't have water. So that's like €10. And all these costs are very subjective and individual. They're unique for each situation. And that's the service of the arbitration agency to look at all these factors, these expenses, the expense of the third party arbitration to rule on the situation, that goes to the criminal. So these types of prices, I think they're not even occurring today, but they have to be something discovered in the free market. It's a whole other service that, we have insurance companies. They exist right now. They're the natural framework for governance in a free society. But they're so heavily restricted by governments and states that they cannot fulfill their potential function in a society. And until then, I think we have to be careful in our theorizing about how these operations occur and what they can do, what their potential, their capacities are, and whether they can go rogue. I don't know if I can answer the question, because
It is possible to establish an economic calculation in the moral market. Imagine the moral market. The first one is to establish a definition. What is a moral market?
right.
Really,
Yeah.
we got demand of morality or ethics, and we got supply of moral or
Yes.
ethics.
Yes.
But every subject, every individual subject, have a different degree about what is the feeling, what are the feeling of morality or ethics, what are the boundaries,
Mm-hmm.
It is possible to establish an economic calculation in this kind of markets because when you have a affection about a hardware item, you can establish a price calculation. It's absolutely
Right.
clear,
Yes.
Demand and supply, and we can put the price,
Yeah.
But when the situation affects moral, affects feelings,
Yeah.
how is possible to establish an economic calculation? I agree that we can establish a market in everything, everywhere,
Yes.
for moral, for ethics, for bottles, for cars, But how can go further in order to establish the possibility is not the ley del talión, because when we have been spoken about the libertarian point of view, if you hit me, I can hit you,
Yeah.
But this is the ley of talión, one eye for one eye,
Mm-hmm.
But we can establish a economic calculation to define all the possible options that we can, be in the earlier situation.
Yes, I think you're right. There are markets for everything, especially ones yet to come for the moral markets. And I think my confliction is that all prices are subjective.
Mm-hmm.
So this price, much like any other, would be something. It would be something dynamic and developing in a society. There's no objective price for each scenario where I chop an arm off, 20 million.
Put in mind, sorry for the interruption, but I am thinking, for example, how can we calculate how a life can cost? We can establish the same that a company's insurance, a price for the life of people, using different, how do you say, parameters, you know?
Yes.
But the same that the companies made how do you say, a life secure, you know?
Mm-hmm.
We can make a calculation for life, but how can we make a calculation for feelings?
It's
part of this problem.
Yes. It would be much more subjective. I think it would have to be, because it's not something tangible. It's just purely subjective. Your feelings, like the same scenario can happen to the same person at a different time, or the same scenario to different people, and the reactions, the feelings are totally different.
Totally agree.
So that would be much more dynamic.
We must think about this, you know. We have in this market situation that are very clear, and it's not easy because when we make the calculation for a life, you know, it's a very complex situation, you know. But for us, it's quite clear, and for insurance companies, more than us, you know. But it's very interesting to make a paper analyzing the market of the morality, the market of the ethics. How to establish an economic calculation?
Yeah, I like the idea, the subtitle, the price of feelings.
Yeah, the price of feelings. Okay. More questions?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. No hay nada más. ¿Verdad? Excelente. Excelente, de verdad que sí. Genial.
Okay, gracias.
Oscar.